slowed down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am subbing in for Erin McDonough today. She had a conflict, so I guess let's start with our poll questions here. Can you pull them up first, please? So first one is about your role in the research community. I think we ask this most of the time, but it's good for us to just keep an eye on who our attendees are to this meeting. So all right, I think that's probably right. It's interesting. We have a lot of others, so we may need to figure out what other means to people. If you marked other and want to put what your role is in the chat, just so we think about our categories, that might be useful because if there's a lot of people in a specific role that we don't have up there, we can add it. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Okay, yeah, this one's about longevity, just getting an idea of how long the attendees have been on campus. Oh, thanks, Aaron. Okay, a lot in the 5+ years. 2/3, that's awesome. Um, okay, is it just those two questions here? Okay, all right. So then today we have two speakers, or two, actually three speakers, two topics. First, Kat is going to talk about her role as the director of CRAO. For those of you that don't know Kat, Kat was the assistant director of COMERB for many years and has recently taken the director of CRAO position that Deb Barnard held. So she'll talk kind of about the CRAO office and her role. And then after that, John Heldens, who's the director of COMERB, and Christy Williamson, who's the assistant director of COMERB, are going to talk to us as well. So we can, Kat, do you want to go ahead and?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. So I'm Kat Sutherland, previously the assistant director of COMERB with John Heldens, and now I've moved into the director of CRAO. We have been very busy in the past 3 months since I took on this new role. We've done some restructuring, and I'm going to share a slide to show you what has changed. So all of these offices are under Allison Lakin, and CRAO has had a couple of things move out under new departments. So the first thing that's moved is external IRB. So anytime you go through an IRB that is not COMERB, that office has moved under John Heldens in COMERB. And then the auditing QI team has moved under John as well. We think that all of those things make the most sense there and can be centralized. Contracting has moved under Christina Hearn in regulatory compliance. They were all previously under CRAO. So now CRAO retains Encore, eReg, ADC, HSR portals, Zendesk, SARC, CT.gov, and a couple of other things. And so some of the other things that we've been working on that some of you may know about and some of you may not are some QI projects to look at what's working and what's not working and how we can streamline things. So we have a major project that's looking at submissions from portal to OTA and looking at the timelines for those to see if there are any places that we can make improvements. I know that the timelines are very long. That's really hard for the study teams. We also have some small work groups looking at things like onboarding and needs assessments for researchers and research teams. We want to look at EREG and EDC use, as well as promoting it, getting some more support out there for you as users. I'm looking at making some website changes. I would like to include some contact information about who works in CRAO and what their roles are. I want to have a section that has news and updates so that you know what's happening with us, let you know about the QI projects that are happening, and also have some space for feedback. And then I think that the thing that I'm most excited about is encouraging partnership with affiliates, study teams, and other groups on campus. I've worked really closely with a lot of you, and you all matter so much to me. I really appreciate your feedback. If there's anything that you see as problematic or really good that you want to communicate with me about, that would be fantastic. I would love that. Please do reach out. My dog's going to bark right now. And then, does anyone have any questions for me about the restructuring or anything in the new role? Nicole, who do we contact about statuses of industry-sponsored CTAs? That is under Christina Hearn, right? Yes.
Yeah. So you can contact, there's the CRAO contracts email. Let me put that in the chat.
Okay, so I was just checking, we do still use that email, even though you said CRAO doesn't do contracts anymore?
Yeah, it's still gonna say CRAO in the email.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions, concerns?
Kat, I just have one question. For any external IRB request, now it will go to John directly, like if we have to have a Reliance agreement or something like that. I think I'm working with Christy on one of them. So I just wanted to make sure, like, is it like implemented right now, or it is in the future? What is the timeline?
Yep, so that's already happened. The office is already under John, and Christy is actually over on that side as well. And so the process hasn't changed, just the location of the office.
If you're in touch with Christy, you're good.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. No other questions, thoughts, feelings?
Just as a comment, Kat, Christine, Christy, Allison, we're all in frequent communication with one another. So across the board, there's really solid communication. If you reach one of us, we'll get you in the right place. So you can't sort of go wrong, is what I'm saying.
We're a great team. External IRB group email address should still be used. Yep. Yep, that hasn't changed at all either. Awesome. You're also quiet today.
You want to just, I don't know that everybody knows that EREG and EDC are options at this point. You want maybe just want to touch on that?
Yeah, yes. So EREG and EDC are both options. I know that there hasn't been a whole lot of information put out there about them, about their use, and who to contact and how to get in there, and even, information about what they are and what they do. So we are gonna start getting that out. We're gonna start putting things in our newsletters and eventually have them on our websites. If you think that EREG, which is a regulatory binder, might be useful to you, you can absolutely reach out to our group and we can show you the ropes and get you in there.
Can there be any way where we can introduce EREG to a department, like if there is some way that if it can be presented in a meeting or something for the department PIs? Because for me to present it to them, it's a little bit difficult. So I just want kind of a communication that we can present directly to the PIs, and let them choose for their studies to use EREC, because for some of the sponsored studies, I think industry sponsored studies, we need to add a fee in there, and just to kind of communicate this to the PI and let them know that that's what is needed and how it will make their life easier, kind of. So it's something that I'm working on. So if it's possible, who should I reach out to, and who can I contact at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. We would be happy to do that. You can email me, and I'll put my email into the chat. And it might be helpful, Ben, if maybe we do a presentation to this group. I think there's something happening in August with Sarah, who's a member of my team. Is she presenting about EREG, or?
Sierra probably knows better than I think she is presenting about you,
I
right?
think
next
she
week.
is. Yep,
Mhm.
yep. So we'll have more information for this group about that in August, but in the meantime, totally happy to do presentations about it to PIs or study teams. If you would like that, feel free to email me. And yes, we can send out a copy of the new org chart to the attendees. And yes, there is a fee for the use of EREG. It's $1,000 for industry trials, and then free for investigator-initiated trials. Okay, it seems like that's it. But please do reach out. I'm very happy to see all of you, and I'm really excited to partner with you in my new role.
So we can move on to John and Christy.
All right, thanks, Sierra. Yeah, just start the presentation. There we go. Christy and I are going to talk to you about some work we're doing restructuring all around IRB reliances. As Kat mentioned, Christy Williamson is now an COMERB Assistant Director for Quality Assurance and IRB reliances. We are still recruiting for CATS replacement, COMERB Assistant Director. Next slide. Okay, so for today, we want to go over some basic definitions about what we mean by IRB reliance, just because internally there seems to be some confusion about what it does and does not mean. We're going to discuss the quality improvement project we're working on right now. I think, across the board, Kat mentioned quality improvement projects she's working on. We are too. So we're definitely interested in, being more efficient and constantly looking at how we're organized. We'll talk about our current organizational structure, the sort of movement to an IRB reliance office, and then some tips if you're relying on an external IRB or relying on COMERB, or COMERB is a single IRB. Next slide. So what's an IRB reliance agreement? I think you all know this, but just to touch base on this, it's an agreement between two institutions that documents the delegation of IRB review responsibilities. That is, the IRB review as a service, just covers the IRB services only. And it's an agreement between one university and another, for example, or one university and a private IRB. So the large purpose, we want to avoid duplicative IRB reviews at initial review and throughout the life of the studies. An IRB reliance will always involve the IRB offices at both institutions if we're talking about two academic institutions. So one implication or comment I seem, or misunderstanding I get from investigators sometimes is that this somehow means that another IRB or another institution doesn't need to know about the study at all. And that's just not the case. We always have to involve both institutions. And then finally, there's two pieces to every reliance. There's the institutional reliance, the IRB reliance agreement, and then whichever IRB is actually reviewing the research, they have to provide an approval for the site, for the relying site. So 2 pieces. Thank you. Next slide. So this is where we're at right now. We've got, we are working with Leah Emmerich from our own group here, who is a huge help for us in sort of developing and working through quality improvement projects. So we are looking at IRB reliances altogether, whether it's an external reliance or COMRB is serving as the single IRB. And generally speaking, I think it's working fairly well, but there's a lot of examples where it's unclear for researchers, and the whole process is a little bit opaque, could be more transparent, and I'll go into that a little more. So we've had our first big meeting about this, and we've got a good direction. Next slide. So quick touch on metrics. We have over 2,000 active IRB reliances with external IRBs. Most of those are with private IRBs such as WCG and Advara, but more and more since the single IRB rule went into effect, we have reliances with other universities. And then Christy, it's what, 40 a day? Something like that.
About 40 a month.
40 a month, 40 a month, 40 a day would be a lot. Okay. And in a COMRB, we've got over 500 studies. And that's probably low, that number there, where we're serving as a single IRB for another site. So that's 500 studies with at least 2 sites involved. Most of these are regular partners such as Natural Jewish, Boulder, and CSU, but quite a few with other institutions as well. And that number, that has grown a lot. So which is a big impetus why we need to sort of revisit our process for getting these reliances in place. Next slide. Current state. So if you're a research team and you need an IRB reliance, your first question is, am I asking to rely on an external IRB, or do I want to ask COMRB to serve as the single IRB? And there's confusion about that question right off the bat. Some people want COMRB to serve as a single IRB, and they may send an email to the external IRB group. Some people may want to rely on an external IRB and contact COMRB. We get various random emails to Kat and Allison about this issue. But if you want to rely on an external IRB, you go to the external team, which is currently Christy and Loretta. If you want COMRB to serve as a single IRB, then we funnel you to the actual panel that reviewed the research. So it would have been reviewed under one of our 5 IRBs, and A, B, C, D, or S. And the first name you see there is the IRB manager, and the second is the IRB review specialist. Those are the 2 people that handle the reliance details when we get to that. Next slide. This is the direction we're moving in. If you want an IRB reliance, it doesn't matter what kind of reliance we're talking to, you go to one point of contact. So trying to consolidate the ask from the research team. Christy will oversee this group. We still have a lot of development to do here, so this is not quite in place, but this is the idea. And then if COMRB is serving as the single IRB, there will be communication and involvement of the COMRB panels, but we'll try to have the research teams work with a smaller group of people on our side. So like from the previous slide, you might recognize, there are about a dozen people you might work with depending on the issue. So we want to get that, I'm going to reduce that number down a little more and just sort of consolidate our resources. Next slide. And this is our new COMRB organizational structure. At this point, well, you can just see broadly, Christy continues to oversee the QA group. We have the Reliance group there in purple on the right, and then the COMRB traditional teams on the left. All right, Christy, would you take it the rest of the way?
Yeah, thanks. Next slide. So here is, I know this is kind of a busy slide, but we'll step through it together. This is really the process for when COMRB is serving as a single IRB. The process is fairly similar when you're relying on an IRB that is not COMERB, but today we're going to just look at when COMERB is single IRB. So it really starts with that initial IRB approval from COMERB. And what they do then is in this middle line, they provide those IRB approved documents, protocol, consent form, anything else to our local CU study team. And then it is up to that study team to provide those documents to sites that are going to rely on COMERB. And so they give those documents to that relying site study team. And from there, that relying site study team has to get in contact with their local IRB office and follow any rules, any obligations that that office has to have. And then going down to that bottom line, once we get, once that relying site has their consent form and any other documents approved by their local IRB site, they send it back to our CU study team. And then our CU study team can take those documents and submit an amendment to COMERB to add that relying site. But in the meantime, this top line, COMERB is reaching out to that relying site saying, hey, we've got our local context survey, and here's an IRB reliance agreement for your review and completion and signatures. The relying site gets that and completes those documents, gets the necessary signatures, and sends it back to COMERB. And so then when COMERB has that local context survey, the IRB reliance agreement, they use that in addition to the amendment and review everything, and then can approve the addition of that site to the study. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we see here in the yellow are the hangups. And part of our QI process is to identify those hangups, see what we can do with that, and see how we can make this more transparent for all of you. And so the first one is right in the middle, that middle row, where the relying site study team has to send their IRB approved documents to their local IRB office. That part is, it's not transparent. We don't know what's going on. We don't know if they've sent those documents to the IRB office. This part is kind of a mystery and a black hole that, we'd like to get a closer handle on. So that's one of the main hangups that we have and can take some time. And then dropping down in that bottom row, there might be specific things that need to be put into the consent form from that relying site. And so sometimes it can take a while to put that consent form together, which makes sense. It's an important document. So that's another hangup that we see as well. And then the very top row where where COMERB is trying to get documents back from the relying site IRB's office. Sometimes it takes that IRB office a while to complete those forms and get them back to us. So those are really the main areas that we're hoping to be able to streamline a little bit more, have a little bit more insight as to those processes and how we can address that. Next slide. So some tips for when you're relying on an external IRB. It's kind of a two-step process, if you will. There's like the before IRB submission and then after IRB approval. So prior to IRB submission, please submit to the HSR portal. And what that does is it provides us all the information we need to know to make our determination on whether or not we can seed review. It's not just an automatic yes, we can rely on every IRB out there. They're not all created equally. And so we determine that 99.9% of the time it's okay, but we still need to verify, which IRB you're wanting to rely on and if that's okay. There are also certain types of study in which we cannot rely on an external IRB for, and so we keep those internally at COMERB. So just a reminder, if a study is deemed exempt, If it's non-human subject research or it does not have funding, we will keep those in-house at COMERB. Another thing that can really help with your process through the external IRB office is making sure that all study personnel listed on the study are current with their city training and all of their COI disclosures have been made. And then after IRB approval has been received, send us a copy of the IRB approval letter and all associated approved documents. That is something that we will upload into the InfoEd record for this study, and it helps us to verify that, yep, this study has approval by the IRB, they are good to go. And if the study is industry initiated and industry funded, we might ask you for the fully executed contract. We have access to those, but there are times where we don't have it right at our fingertips. So if we ask you for it, what we're doing is we are wanting to take a look at the subject injury coverage language that's in the contract that says who might, that will say if the sponsor will cover in case of research related injury or not. And we want to make sure that that language is in harmony with what is in the IRB approved informed consent document. If we were to have a consent document that says to the subject, if you're injured by this research, the sponsor will pay for it, but the clinical trial agreement says otherwise, and that subject gets injured by the research, it's not a good situation. And so this one last kind of final check makes sure that the documents are in sync, that our subjects are protected. And so after that, then we provide UCD sign off, and then we'll update Encore as necessary. And then for the life of the study, as it's going on, just send us IRB approval letters that you get. These are for continuing reviews, protocol amendments. If there are reportable events, so if you're reporting SAEs or UAPs, non-compliance, and you get a determination letter back from the IRB, please let us know. Email us if there are any personnel changes, and then send us study closure notices. And the question in the chat, this is a great question. So yeah, for Advara and WCG IRBs, external IRB is copied on all of the approvals. But yes, please, we do still need you to send all of those approval letters because we do not log in. We don't have access to everybody's individual studies. So if you could just send us a copy of that, that would be really helpful. Thanks for asking that. Next slide, please. And then some tips for relying on COMERB. COMERB is single IRB. Talk with COMERB early, loop them in very early on. That's going to make the process very smooth. And then another tip, just make sure that relying site investigators have communicated with their local IRB about relying on COMERB. Again, that was one of our hangups that we see most often is we provide them with the approval documents, and then we're not sure if they've reached out to their local IRB or not. So also know you may have to remind them more than once. I'm just going to take a moment and address the chat here. The question is, if we select the wrong IRB in the initial HSR portal submission, for instance, we selected WCG, but it's actually going to be COMERB. What's the best way to get that corrected? Just email us. This happens all the time, so not a problem. Just email us and we can get it sorted out. Okay, so then again, when COMERB is single IRB, something else to keep in mind is that all of the different sites, all the different sites that are relying on COMERB might have specific requirements. So some of them might require that informed consent and HIPAA authorizations be separate. So just know that that's a thing. Ensure that any new documents approved by COMERB are distributed to those relying sites. So once we get that approval from COMERB, share it with all the relying sites. And then please ensure that any unanticipated problems or potential serious or continuing noncompliance at any of the relying sites are reported to COMERB. Right, next slide. And some reminders for you. The IRB Reliance Agreement is signed by Dr. Lakin. She's Associate Vice Chancellor for Regulatory Compliance. There might be some differences just depending on which sites are included. But PI cannot sign that document. Study coordinators cannot sign that document. And then also the IRB Reliance does not obviate the need for clinical trial agreements, data sharing or transfer agreements, or hospital approvals. Those are all very separate processes. And again, if you have questions about that, or we see, it come across one of our desks and you need to get in touch with, Kat or Christine Ahern, we can absolutely get you in touch with the appropriate people. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm going to open the floor. Any questions that you may have? And we do realize that time frames for things have slowed a bit, and that is something that we're also addressing as part of our QI project. No questions?
Yeah, if anybody has questions or comments or problems that they've had with IRB reliances of late, with co-observing single IRB or otherwise, happy to receive those. You can close the presentation.
Hey, Christy, I have a real quick question. So with the amendments and everything that go through an external IRB, so for example, we have studies where, sponsors kind of submit for every little thing. They have a new ad or they have the study website. Are those all things that should go to external IRB to keep the records updated here, or are we just looking at amendments that are pertinent to a protocol update and such?
Yeah, we want the approval letters for all amendments. That way we could just keep a full record of it. Then those don't, the amendments for little things like that you just described don't need to come to our office ahead of time before you submit to the IRB. But if there are changes to the consent form to specifically subject injury, compensation, or HIPAA language, we would love to see that before it gets submitted to the IRB.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any just kind of, I guess that's the one part where myself, especially, we have such a large portfolio of studies over here in the Department of Surgery. Is there any sort of QI being considered for an easier route for submitting those forms or those approval letters? So for example, I upload everything into Encore for the approval letter so that record's there, but then I have to send it separately via email. Is that being taken into consideration at all?
It is on the list of things.
Okay, perfect.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback too. Yeah, and we are open to hearing feedback or challenges on your end, just process-wise. This is a really great time as we're considering all the different things that we can streamline and make easier. Love to hear your thoughts. And if you don't have to send them now, but you can send them later if you think about it later.
Christy, I have one question. I think I'm working with you on one of the IRB Reliance too. So sometimes what the other study sites do, they send a pre-IRB, pre-HSR, pre-everything document that needs to be filled out by the institutional person to add information in there. Is there any way if we can get something on that basis, kind of a form where if the other study team is asking us something, we can just send them that pre-filled information instead of filling up their form? We can say, this is the link, you can go there, can download this form, and this will answer all of your questions. Is there anything like that?
That is a national question. It's we are aware of that issue too. you know, every IRB is doing this differently. I mean, to answer your question more directly, those documents already exist and the IRBs already have access to them. You know, we have institutional profiles in Smart IRB and another system related to Smart IRB called IREX. Most of these other university IRBs can access those documents, but they insist on their own forms. And for right now, we're kind of stuck. But I can tell you that particular issue, there was a webinar about just that just a couple of months ago with IREX and IRBs trying to solve that particular problem. I don't think we made headway, but it's a frustrating problem for us as well as you.
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. Thank you.
Alrighty, so as changes sort of get finalized, you will see more announcements, either, you know, a variety of ways, either on our webpage at here, through newsletters. So if we, you know, once the office formally comes together, if we change an email address, for example, that will be published and the old email addresses will be directed to the new email addresses, so you don't nobody gets lost in the shuffle.
Awesome. Thanks, John and Christy. I will echo what John said. If you reach out to anybody in Central Research Administration, we should be able to point you to the right people. We all communicate with each other and are in meetings with each other all the time. So I have just a few announcements to go over before we end the meeting. A reminder, tomorrow there's a decentralized clinical trial community of practice meeting at 8 a.m. and our speaker is John Heldens. So thanks, John, for always being willing to talk. Sierra just put the link for registration in there. He's going to talk about some of the regulatory implications from an IRB perspective as they relate to DCTs. And so it should be an interesting discussion. In addition to that, on August 13th, there's the CU-CSU Summit in the Element Conference Center, or Element Conference Room in AHSB. That is nice. A lot of times those are held off-site, and so it's nice that this one is on campus, and so people could just kind of walk over and attend that. There's more information at that link that Sierra just posted. And then the week of August 20th, we have multiple events. We have Clinical Research Connections on August 20th, and I think we have a talk about IVAR-E-Reg, as we just talked about. August 21st is the next of the quarterly recruitment program workshops, and we will have people from the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement talking about the LGBTQ plus hub and considerations with your study documents to be more friendly to that community. The 22nd of August, we have the end of summer event hosted by the Workforce Development Group, which is Trisha and Haley. That will be at Milieu Fermentation, which is on campus. It's where Ursula used to be, for those of you that remember. And so look for more announcements about that. And then the last thing I have on here is just to remind people that the Anschutz Block Party is coming up in September. I think it's September 18th. And so a lot of our central research groups will have a presence at the block party, be talking about our programs and offerings and things like that. We have a little bit of time. Are there any other comments, questions, announcements that anybody else has on the call? Thanks, Sierra. So Sierra just put a ton of links in the chat if any of you are interested in those events. All right, going once. Going twice. Okay, we will see you. And then the last thing, I guess, we'll see you in September. We still are looking at reformatting this meeting and deciding on how to do that. I think we may reach out to the community and ask for some input, but if any of you have any ideas before we formally do that, on what works well. We're thinking of reducing the frequency of these meetings and having more standalone seminars and discussions. So feel free to reach out to any of us, Sierra or I, or anyone in Central Research Administration if you have any ideas. But we have, as you can tell, we've gone from a group of attendees of 80 plus to now being in the like 40s range. And so I think some of it is better job communicating and making sure that the links work and things like that. But I do think that there's an opportunity to kind of look at it and see if there's a better way to do this. Okay, so we will see you for this meeting next month on August 20th. The link for the recorded meeting goes on to the CRAO website. Thanks for mentioning that, Sierra. I don't know, can you put the link to the CRAO website in the chat too, if you have? So it usually within a week of these meetings occurring, there is a posted recording of the meeting, as well as we try and update that website with the agenda for the next 1 or 2 months worth of meetings. So that right there, the CRAO website is the source of truth for Clinical Research Connections now. All right, thank you all.